The dust settled on the dirt road as a lone figure stumbled into Redemption Creek, a mining town nestled in the heart of Colorado Territory, 1876. Francesca Turner had nothing but the tattered dress on her back and a small pouch containing her mother's silver locket, the only thing of value she owned in this world. Her once beautiful auburn hair hung in tangled strands around her dirt-smudged face, and her green eyes, though dulled by exhaustion, still held a flicker of determination that refused to die. "Another piece of trash blown in with the wind," muttered Samuel Davis, the saloon owner, loud enough for everyone on the porch to hear as Francesca approached the town's only water pump. Francesca kept her head down, ignoring the snickers from the men lounging outside the rusty nail saloon. She had endured worse in the 3 weeks since her father's death left her with nothing but debts and unwanted advances from his creditors. When she'd refused the local banker's proposition back in Denver, he'd made sure she couldn't find work anywhere in the city. With no money and no prospects, she'd scraped together enough for a stagecoach ticket to somewhere, anywhere else. "You there, girl," a harsh voice called out. Francesca turned to see a heavy-set woman with arms crossed standing in the doorway of the general store. "You looking for work or just taking up space?" "Work, madam," Francesca answered, squaring her shoulders despite her fatigue. "I can cook, clean, sew." "Can you wash dishes without breaking them?" the woman interrupted, eyeing her critically. "Yes, madam." "Good. My girl just ran off with a miner. 5 cents a day in meals. You can sleep in the storeroom." It wasn't much, but it was something. Francesca nodded gratefully and followed the woman, Mrs. Holloway, into the store, ignoring the jeers from the men outside. "Worthless trash like that won't last a week," one of them called after her. "That's what they always say," Francesca whispered to herself. Mrs. Holloway worked Francesca harder than any human should be worked. From dawn until well past dusk, she cleaned, stocked shelves, and served customers who often treated her as invisible. When they did acknowledge her, it was with disdain or unwanted attention. Still, she endured. The storeroom was dry, the daily meals were filling if bland, and she was slowly saving her meager wages. After 2 weeks of this existence, Francesca was sweeping the porch when a commotion caught her attention. 3 riders came galloping down the main street, their horses kicking up clouds of dust. The man in the lead sat tall in his saddle, his broad shoulders and confident posture marking him as someone of importance. The silver-adorned black hat he wore shaded his face, but even from a distance, Francesca could sense his authority. "Mr. Sullivan," Mrs. Holloway hurried out, practically pushing Francesca aside. "We weren't expecting you back for another week." Garrett Sullivan, owner of the Silver Creek Ranch, the largest cattle operation in the territory, swung down from his horse with the easy grace of a man who had spent his life in the saddle. His face was tanned from the sun, with laugh lines around his eyes that spoke of a man who smiled often, though he wasn't smiling now. He nodded curtly to Mrs. Holloway before his gaze landed on Francesca. "New girl?" he asked, his voice deep and resonant. "Just temporary help," Mrs. Holloway answered dismissively. "Worthless thing, but she works cheap." Francesca kept her eyes down, continuing to sweep as if she hadn't heard the slight. She had learned that showing reaction only invited more cruelty. "Well, I'll need supplies for the ranch," Sullivan said, his attention returning to business. "We've got 20 new hands coming in for the drive to Kansas City." Mrs. Holloway ushered him inside, eager to secure such a large order. Francesca remained outside, finishing her sweeping, when a young boy of about 10 came running up, nearly colliding with her. "Sorry, miss," he gasped out of breath. "Is Mr. Sullivan in there? I got an urgent telegram for him." Before Francesca could answer, the boy darted inside. Minutes later, Sullivan emerged, his face grim. He conferred quickly with his companions before mounting his horse. "Change of plans," he told Mrs. Holloway, who had followed him out. "We're heading back now. Have those supplies ready by tomorrow noon. I'll send men to collect them." As he turned his horse, the animal suddenly reared, spooked by a snake slithering across the road. Sullivan maintained his seat, but his prized hat flew off, landing in the dirt near Francesca's feet. Without thinking, she picked it up and quickly brushed it clean. "Your hat, sir," she said, offering it up to him. For the first time, Sullivan really looked at her. His eyes, a striking shade of blue, met hers, and something passed between them, a moment of recognition, though they had never met before. "Much obliged," he said, taking the hat. Then, instead of putting it back on his head, he surprised everyone by placing it gently on Francesca's. "Looks better on you anyway." The hat was far too large, slipping down over her eyes, causing her to push it back to see his face. The corner of his mouth lifted in a half-smile. "What's your name?" he asked. "Francesca Turner, sir." "Well, Miss Turner, take care of that hat. I'll be back for it tomorrow." With that, he spurred his horse and galloped away, leaving Francesca standing there with his expensive hat on her head and the entire town staring in disbelief. "Take that ridiculous thing off and get back to work," Mrs. Holloway snapped, her face flushed with anger. "Who does he think he is, giving my help gifts?" "It's not a gift," Francesca explained, carefully removing the hat. "He's coming back for it tomorrow." Well, don't get any ideas. Men like Garrett Sullivan don't look twice at girls like you." But he had looked twice, Francesca thought, as she returned to her chores. And something in that look had made her feel, for the first time since arriving in Redemption Creek, like she might be worth something after all. That night, Francesca slept with the hat beside her thin mattress in the storeroom. She had cleaned it carefully and positioned it where she could see it first thing in the morning, a reminder that perhaps there was kindness in this harsh world after all. The following day crawled by as Francesca waited anxiously for Sullivan's return. Mrs. Holloway had her working twice as hard, perhaps hoping to prevent any further interaction with the rancher. By midday, the promised ranch hands arrived to collect the supplies, but Sullivan wasn't among them. "Where's Mr. Sullivan?" Mrs. Holloway asked as the men loaded the goods onto a wagon. "Busy with ranch business," one of them replied gruffly. "Said to tell you he'll settle the bill next time he's in town." Francesca's heart sank. She had been foolish to read anything into yesterday's interaction. She continued stocking shelves, trying not to dwell on her disappointment. As the afternoon waned, she was sent to deliver a package to the telegraph office at the far end of town. On her way back, she passed the town's only restaurant, a modest establishment that catered to travelers and the town's few affluent residents. To her surprise, she spotted Sullivan sitting alone at a table by the window. He seemed deep in thought, a half-eaten meal before him. Francesca hesitated. The hat was back at the store, and Mrs. Holloway would be furious if she delayed her return. But this might be her only chance. Gathering her courage, she approached the restaurant and entered. The few patrons turned to stare at her, clearly wondering what someone like her was doing in such a place. Sullivan looked up, and recognition flickered across his face. "Miss Turner," he acknowledged with a nod. "Mr. Sullivan," she replied, suddenly uncertain. I have your hat back at the store. I thought you might want it returned." "Have you eaten?" he asked, ignoring her statement about the hat. The question caught her off guard. "No, sir." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Join me." The restaurant owner stepped forward, looking concerned. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm not sure." "Miss Turner is my guest," Sullivan said firmly, his tone brooking no argument. Reluctantly, the owner backed away, and Francesca, equally reluctant but for different reasons, took the offered seat. "You must be hungry," Sullivan observed, signaling for the waiter. "Order whatever you like." "I can't accept considerate payment for taking care of my hat," he interrupted with a smile that transformed his serious face into something quite handsome. So Francesca found herself eating the first proper restaurant meal of her life, across from one of the most powerful men in the territory. At first, the conversation was stilted, but Sullivan proved to be surprisingly easy to talk to once they moved past the initial awkwardness. "How did you end up in Redemption Creek?" he asked between bites of his beefsteak. Francesca hesitated, then decided on honesty. "My father died in debt. I had nowhere else to go." "And no family to take you in?" "None," she admitted. "My mother passed when I was 14. And father, well, he was never the same after that. Started drinking, gambling. I tried to keep things together, but..." She trailed off, not wanting to burden this stranger with her troubles. Sullivan studied her face. "And now Mrs. Holloway works you to the bone for pennies." It wasn't a question, so Francesca didn't answer. Instead, she asked, "Why did you put your hat on my head yesterday?" He seemed surprised by the directness of her question. "I'm not entirely sure," he admitted after a moment. "Something in your eyes, perhaps. You reminded me of someone." "Who?" "Myself, many years ago." He didn't elaborate, and Francesca didn't press. They finished their meal in companionable silence. When they stepped outside, the sun was setting, painting the dusty street in hues of gold and red. "I should get your hat," Francesca said, aware that Mrs. Holloway would be furious by now. "Keep it," Sullivan replied. "It suits you." "I couldn't possibly—" "Consider it a loan then," he amended, "until I see you again." The implication that he intended to see her again sent a strange flutter through Francesca's chest. "Mrs. Holloway won't like it." "Mrs. Holloway doesn't own you," he said, his voice suddenly hard. Then, more gently, "Do you like working for her?" Francesca considered lying, then decided against it. "No, but there aren't many options for women like me." Sullivan nodded thoughtfully. "My ranch housekeeper has been complaining about needing help. The pay is better, $15 a month plus room and board, if you're interested." $15 a month was more than Francesca had ever earned, but she hesitated. "Why would you offer me a position? You don't know me." "I'm a good judge of character," Sullivan said simply. "And good help is hard to find. Think about it. If you're interested, I'll send someone for you the day after tomorrow." With that, he tipped his head in farewell and walked away, leaving Francesca standing on the boardwalk, stunned by the unexpected turn of events. Mrs. Holloway was livid when Francesca returned. "Where have you been, girl? And what's this I hear about you dining with Garrett Sullivan like some fine lady?" "He invited me," Francesca replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I was returning his hat." "Which you're still wearing." Mrs. Holloway snatched the hat from Francesca's head. "Filling your head with nonsense, no doubt. Well, you can forget whatever he promised you. Girls like you always end up in one place, and it's not a respectable ranch." The implication stung, but Francesca had heard worse. "He offered me a position as a housemaid. $15 a month." Mrs. Holloway laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "And you believed him? Men like Sullivan don't hire trash off the street for their homes. He wants one thing from you, girl, and it isn't your skills with a broom." Doubt crept into Francesca's mind. Why would a man like Sullivan offer her such an opportunity? She had nothing to recommend her, no references, no particular skills beyond the basic domestic abilities most women possessed. "Get back to work," Mrs. Holloway ordered, tossing Sullivan's hat onto a shelf behind the counter. "And forget about fairy tales. They don't happen to people like you." For the next day and a half, Francesca went about her duties mechanically, her mind churning with indecision. Was Sullivan sincere, or was Mrs. Holloway right about his intentions? And even if the job offer was legitimate, did she have the courage to leave the little security she had found for an unknown situation? On the morning of the second day, Francesca was sweeping the boardwalk when a wagon pulled up in front of the store. A middle-aged woman with iron-gray hair tied in a neat bun stepped down, her practical dress and no-nonsense demeanor marking her as someone who managed a household with efficiency. "I'm looking for Francesca Turner," she announced, her voice carrying the faint lilt of an Irish accent. "That's me," Francesca replied, her heart racing. The woman looked her up and down with a critical eye. "I'm Mrs. O'Malley, housekeeper at Silver Creek Ranch. Mr. Sullivan says you're to come work for us if you're willing." Mrs. Holloway burst out of the store. "What's this about?" "I've come for Miss Turner," Mrs. O'Malley explained calmly. "Mr. Sullivan has offered her a position at the ranch." "She's employed here," Mrs. Holloway protested. "You can't just take my help." "I believe the young lady can make her own decisions," Mrs. O'Malley replied, turning back to Francesca. "Well, are you coming or staying?" It was a moment of truth. Francesca looked from Mrs. Holloway's angry face to Mrs. O'Malley's impassive one. Then she remembered the way Sullivan had looked at her, as if he saw something in her that others missed. "I'm coming," she said firmly. "I just need to get my things." Her things consisted of a spare dress, her mother's locket, and now Sullivan's hat, which she retrieved from behind the counter despite Mrs. Holloway's objections. Within minutes, she was seated beside Mrs. O'Malley in the wagon, leaving Redemption Creek behind. "Don't think this makes you special," Mrs. O'Malley said once they were on the road. "Mr. Sullivan has a soft heart for strays, but you'll work just as hard at Silver Creek as you did in town." "I don't mind hard work," Francesca assured her. "I'm grateful for the opportunity." Mrs. O'Malley's expression softened slightly. "Well, you'll have decent food and your own room at least, and Sundays off, unless there's company." It sounded like paradise compared to her previous situation. "How large is the ranch?" Francesca asked, eager to learn about her new home. "Largest in the territory," Mrs. O'Malley said with pride. 10,000 acres, 500 head of cattle, and 30 hands during the busy season. The main house is 2 stories, with 8 bedrooms, though only Mr. Sullivan's is occupied regularly. "He lives alone?" Francesca couldn't help asking. Mrs. O'Malley gave her a sharp look. "Mr. Sullivan is a widower. His wife passed 5 years ago during a difficult childbirth, the baby too. He hasn't been the same since, though he hides it well." The information sobered Francesca. Sullivan's kindness toward her took on a different light. With this knowledge, perhaps he recognized in her the same kind of loss he had experienced. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said quietly. "It's not something we discuss," Mrs. O'Malley replied. "I'm only telling you so you understand the household you're entering. Mr. Sullivan is a good man, fair and generous, but private. He keeps to himself mostly, except when ranch business requires otherwise." The journey to Silver Creek Ranch took nearly 3 hours. As they crested a hill, Francesca caught her first glimpse of the property spread out below. Lush pastures dotted with cattle, a creek winding through the valley, and at the center, a large, handsome house of whitewashed wood with a wide porch wrapping around it. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "Aye, that it is," Mrs. O'Malley agreed. "Built it himself, Mr. Sullivan did, for his bride. Catherine was her name. Lovely woman." They pulled up to the house, and Mrs. O'Malley showed Francesca to a small but clean room at the back of the house, near the kitchen. There was a real bed with a proper mattress, a chest of drawers, and even a small mirror hanging on the wall, luxuries Francesca hadn't enjoyed since her mother was alive. "Get settled, then come to the kitchen," Mrs. O'Malley instructed. "Plenty of work to be done before dinner." Left alone, Francesca carefully placed her few possessions in the drawer and hung her spare dress on a peg. She set Sullivan's hat on top of the chest, where it served as a reminder of the strange twist of fate that had brought her here. Finally, she fastened her mother's locket around her neck, drawing strength from the connection to the woman who had loved her unconditionally. In the kitchen, Mrs. O'Malley put her to work immediately, peeling potatoes and preparing vegetables for the evening meal. The kitchen was large and well-equipped, designed to feed not only the household, but also the ranch hands during roundups and busy seasons. "Mr. Sullivan dines at 7, Mrs. O'Malley explained as they worked. "He usually eats alone in the dining room, though sometimes his foreman or business associates join him. The hands eat in the bunkhouse, which has its own cook. Our job is the main house in the family, such as it is." "Does Mr. Sullivan have any other family?" Francesca asked, curious about the man who had so unexpectedly changed her circumstances. "A brother back east, I believe, though they're not close. His parents passed years ago." Mrs. O'Malley glanced at her. "You ask a lot of questions for someone in your position." Francesca blushed. "I'm sorry. I just want to understand my place here." Mrs. O'Malley's expression softened again. "Your place is to work hard and be grateful for the chance Mr. Sullivan has given you. Many would have left you to your fate in that town." That evening, Francesca helped serve dinner to Sullivan, who ate alone in the formal dining room. He acknowledged her with a nod but said little, appearing preoccupied with ranch matters. After dinner, he retired to his study with ledgers and papers, and Francesca didn't see him again that night. The days fell into a routine. Francesca rose before dawn to help prepare breakfast, then spent her days cleaning, washing, and assisting Mrs. O'Malley with whatever needed doing. The work was hard but fair, and the food was plentiful. Gradually, the constant hunger that had been her companion for months abated, and some of the hollowness left her cheeks. Sullivan remained something of a mystery. He was often away on ranch business, and when at home, he kept largely to himself. Yet, Francesca occasionally caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher, something between curiosity and wariness, as if he wasn't quite sure what to make of her. A month passed, and then another. Summer turned to early fall, and the ranch bustled with activity as preparations began for the winter months ahead. Francesca grew more confident in her duties and began to feel a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced since her mother's death. One evening, as she was bringing fresh linens to Sullivan's room, a task usually performed by Mrs. O'Malley herself, she found him standing by the window, staring out at the sunset, painting the mountains in brilliant hues of orange and purple. "I'm sorry," she apologized, starting to back out. "I didn't realize you were here." "It's all right," he said, turning to face her. "Come in." Hesitantly, Francesca entered the room and placed the linens on the bureau. She was about to leave when Sullivan spoke again. "You still have my hat," he observed. There was no accusation in his tone, merely statement of fact. "Yes, sir. Would you like it back?" "No," he said after a moment. "It was a gift." "Mrs. O'Malley said you're not in the habit of giving gifts to the help," Francesca ventured, surprising herself with her boldness. Sullivan's mouth quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Mrs. O'Malley knows me well, but not completely." A silence fell between them, not entirely uncomfortable. Sullivan returned his gaze to the window. "Do you regret coming here?" he asked suddenly. "No, sir," Francesca answered truthfully. "I'm very grateful for the opportunity." "That's not what I asked." Francesca considered her words carefully. "I don't regret it. This is the first place since my mother died that has felt safe." Sullivan nodded, as if her answer confirmed something for him. "Good. Everyone deserves a place where they feel safe." Another silence, this one charged with something Francesca couldn't name. Finally, Sullivan said, "That will be all, Miss Turner." She curtsied slightly and left, aware that something had shifted between them, though she couldn't have said exactly what. The next day, Sullivan announced at breakfast that he would be traveling to Denver on business and would be gone for at least a week. The news shouldn't have affected Francesca, whose duties remained the same whether the master was present or not, yet she felt a strange disappointment at his impending absence. "You'll need to prepare the guest rooms," Mrs. O'Malley informed her later. "Mr. Sullivan is bringing back visitors." "Visitors?" Francesca echoed. In her months at Silver Creek, they had hosted occasional business associates for dinner, but no overnight guests. "His brother and sister-in-law," Mrs. O'Malley explained, "from Boston. It seems they've decided to pay a surprise visit. Mr. Sullivan received a telegram this morning." From Mrs. O'Malley's tone, Francesca gathered that these particular visitors were not entirely welcome. "Is something wrong with his brother coming?" Mrs. O'Malley sighed. "George Sullivan is different from his brother, city folk with city ways. The last time they visited Mrs. Sullivan, the younger Mrs. Sullivan, that has made it quite clear she found ranch life beneath her. Made poor Catherine cry, she did, with her sharp remarks and condescending ways." This glimpse into Sullivan's family dynamics intrigued Francesca, but she knew better than to press for more information. Instead, she focused on preparing the guest rooms to Mrs. O'Malley's exacting standards. Sullivan returned 8 days later, accompanied by his brother George, a slimmer, paler version of Garrett, with the same blue eyes but none of the warmth, and his wife Vivian, a fashionably dressed woman with a perpetual expression of dissatisfaction. From the moment they arrived, the atmosphere in the house changed, becoming charged with tension that affected everyone from the maids to the stable boys. Vivian Sullivan found fault with everything: the dust that inevitably settled on surfaces despite constant cleaning, the lack of proper entertainment, even the food, which was simple but well prepared. George was less openly critical, but made it clear through subtle remarks that he found his brother's chosen lifestyle baffling. "Really, Garrett, I don't understand why you insist on remaining in this wilderness," he commented over dinner their second night, a meal Francesca was helping to serve. "The ranch could be managed by a foreman. You could live comfortably in Denver, or better yet, return to Boston." This is my home, Sullivan replied evenly, and my livelihood. A livelihood that has made you wealthy enough to live anywhere, Vivian pointed out, picking at her roast beef with disinterest. What's the point of success if you choose to live like a hermit? Sullivan's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. I appreciate your concern for my happiness, but I assure you, I am content with my life here. Vivian's gaze swept dismissively around the dining room. Content. What a telling word. Not happy or fulfilled, but merely content. Is that enough? After all this time? The conversation continued in this vein, with George and Vivian subtly and not so subtly criticizing Sullivan's choices while he defended them with increasing terseness. Francesca, moving quietly around the table with serving dishes, found herself growing angry on Sullivan's behalf. These people had no right to judge his life, especially when they were enjoying his hospitality. After dinner, as Francesca was clearing the table, she overheard the conversation continuing in the adjacent sitting room. At least consider coming back for Christmas, George was saying. Mother's old friends ask about you constantly. And there are several lovely widows who would be most interested in meeting you. I have no interest in meeting Boston widows, Sullivan replied firmly. Vivian's voice cut in. It's been 5 years, Garrett. Surely even out here that's considered an acceptable mourning period. Catherine would not have wanted you to spend your life alone. Do not, Sullivan said, his voice dangerously quiet. Presume to tell me what my wife would have wanted. A tense silence followed, broken by George clearing his throat. We only want what's best for you, brother. Then respect my choices, Sullivan said, and Francesca heard the creak of a chair as he stood. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have ranch business to attend to. Footsteps approached, and Francesca quickly busied herself with stacking plates, trying to appear as if she hadn't been listening. Sullivan emerged from the sitting room, his face set in lines of frustration. He paused when he saw her. I apologize if you overheard that, he said quietly. It's not my place to comment, sir, Francesca replied, keeping her eyes lowered. No, but I suspect you have opinions nonetheless. There was a hint of amusement in his voice now. Francesca hesitated, then decided honesty was best. I think home is where you make it, sir, and no one has the right to tell you where that should be. Sullivan studied her face for a long moment. Well said, Miss Turner. He started to turn away, then paused. Would you mind bringing coffee to my study later? I have accounts to review. Of course, sir. An hour later, Francesca knocked on the study door with a tray holding coffee and a slice of Mrs. O'Malley's apple pie. Sullivan called for her to enter, and she found him seated behind a large desk covered in papers. Thank you, he said as she set the tray down. That will be all. But as she turned to go, he spoke again. Unless you'd care to stay for a moment, I could use the company of someone who isn't questioning my life choices. Surprised by the invitation, Francesca hesitated. I should return to the kitchen. Mrs. O'Malley can spare you for a few minutes, I'm sure. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. Please. Uncertainly, Francesca sat. Sullivan poured coffee for himself, then, after a moment's hesitation, for her as well. Sugar? He offered, pushing the bowl toward her. No, thank you, she replied, though in truth she had rarely tasted coffee and had no idea how she preferred it. They sat in silence for a moment. The ticking of the clock on the mantel the only sound. Finally, Sullivan spoke. How are you finding Silver Creek, Miss Turner? Truthfully. It's been a blessing, sir, she answered sincerely. I'm very happy here. Despite my family's apparent belief that no one could possibly be happy so far from civilization. His tone was wry. Francesca smiled slightly. I find there's plenty of civilization here, just of a different kind. Sullivan nodded, seeming pleased with her answer. My late wife felt the same way. She was a city girl originally. We met in Denver, but she came to love the ranch as much as I do. This was the first time he had mentioned his wife directly to Francesca. Mrs. O'Malley speaks very highly of her, she ventured. Catherine was easy to speak highly of, Sullivan said, his eyes distant with memory. Kind, intelligent, beautiful. She made this house a home, He shook his head slightly as if clearing away the past. But that was another life. Francesca sipped her coffee, unsure how to respond. The bitter liquid was stronger than she expected, but not unpleasant. "Forgive me," Sullivan said suddenly. "I didn't ask you to stay so I could reminisce about my late wife. I wanted to thank you." "Thank me, sir. For your discretion and hard work these past months. Mrs. O'Malley tells me you've been invaluable." Francesca felt warmth spread through her chest at the praise. "I'm grateful for the chance you gave me, Mr. Sullivan." "Garrett," he said unexpectedly. "When we're not in company, you may call me Garrett." The permission startled her. "That wouldn't be proper, sir." "Perhaps not," he acknowledged, "but I find I'm rather tired of propriety lately." He studied her face. "You still wear that locket." "Is it a keepsake?" Francesca's hand went to the silver oval at her throat. "It was my mother's, the only thing of hers I have left." "May I?" he asked, reaching across the desk. After a moment's hesitation, Francesca leaned forward, allowing him to examine the locket. His fingers were warm as they brushed against her skin, sending an unexpected tingle down her spine. "Beautiful craftsmanship," he observed, releasing the locket, "like its wearer." The compliment hung in the air between them, unexpected and charged with meaning. Francesca wasn't sure she was ready to acknowledge. She stood quickly. "I should return to my duties, Sir Mr. Sullivan." He didn't correct her this time. "Of course. Thank you for the company." As she left the study, Francesca's mind whirled with confusion. What had just happened between them? Surely she was misreading his interest. Men like Garrett Sullivan didn't look twice at women like her. Mrs. Holloway's words came back to haunt her, yet there had been something in his eyes as he examined her locket, something that made her heart beat faster at the memory. The Sullivans' visit stretched into 2 weeks, during which Vivian's complaints grew more pointed and George's hints about Garrett returning east more insistent. Tensions in the household increased, and Francesca found herself working harder than ever to ensure everything was perfect, hoping to give Garrett one less thing to worry about. One afternoon, as she was changing linens in the guest rooms while the Sullivans were out riding with Garrett, Francesca came across a letter that had fallen behind the dresser in Vivian's room. She knew she should simply replace it without looking at the contents, but something curiosity, perhaps, or a protective instinct toward Garrett, made her glance at the partially unfolded paper. What she saw made her blood run cold. The letter, addressed to George from a lawyer in Boston, discussed strategies for convincing Garrett to sell his interest in the ranch and mentioned significant debts that George had accumulated. The implication was clear. George needed money, and he was hoping to convince his brother to sell the ranch to provide it. Francesca carefully refolded the letter and placed it back where she had found it, her mind racing. Should she tell Garrett what she had discovered? Or would that be overstepping her place? She was still just a servant, after all, regardless of their brief moment of connection in his study. Her decision was made for her when she encountered Garrett alone in the hallway that evening. He looked tired, the strain of his brother's visit evident in the lines around his eyes. "Mr. Sullivan," she said quietly, "may I speak with you privately? It's important." Concern crossed his face. "Of course. My study." Once the door was closed behind them, Francesca quickly explained what she had found, feeling guilty for reading the letter but more concerned about the threat to Garrett's ranch. "I know it wasn't my place to look," she finished, "but I thought you should know." Garrett was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "I suspected something like this," he finally said. "George has never been good with money, and his lifestyle in Boston is expensive." "You're not angry?" Francesca asked, relieved but surprised. "Not at you," he clarified. "You were looking out for my interests, which I appreciate." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration. "I'm angry at George for thinking I would abandon everything I've built here to bail him out again." "Again?" Garrett sighed. "This isn't the first time. 3 years ago he lost heavily in some railroad speculation. I gave him money then, quite a lot of money, on the condition he be more careful in the future." His mouth twisted in a wry smile. Clearly, the lesson didn't take. "What will you do?" Francesca asked. "Have a frank conversation with my brother. Garrett replied. And then, I suspect, see them off on the next stagecoach to Denver. He studied her face. Thank you for telling me, Francesca. Your loyalty means a great deal. The use of her first name sent a warm current through her body. The ranch is your home, she said simply. No one should try to take it from you. Something shifted in Garrett's expression then. A softening around his eyes. You understand that, don't you? What it means to have a home worth fighting for. I'm beginning to, she admitted. They stood looking at each other for a long moment, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then Garrett cleared his throat. I should find George, he said. Would you ask Mrs. O'Malley to prepare some coffee? I suspect this will be a long conversation. Of course. Francesca turned to go, but Garrett's voice stopped her at the door. Francesca, he said quietly. Thank you. The confrontation between the brothers took place behind closed doors that evening, but the raised voices could occasionally be heard throughout the house. The next morning, George and Vivian announced they would be departing on the afternoon stagecoach. The atmosphere at breakfast was glacial, with George refusing to meet his brother's eye and Vivian's face set in lines of fury. As Francesca helped them load their luggage onto the wagon that would take them to town, Vivian pulled her aside. You, she said in a low, venomous voice. You're the one who found the letter, aren't you? Francesca kept her expression neutral. I don't know what you're talking about, madam. Don't play innocent with me, Vivian hissed. I know your type, worming your way into a wealthy widower's good graces, thinking you can rise above your station. Let me tell you something, girl. Men like Garrett may dally with women like you, but they don't marry them. The words stung, echoing Mrs. Holloway's warning, but Francesca refused to show it. I'm simply doing my job, madam, nothing more. Vivian's laugh was cold, for now, but I've seen the way he looks at you and the way you look at him. Just remember, he'll never see you as an equal. You'll always be the worthless girl he picked up out of charity. Before Francesca could respond, Garrett appeared. His face set in hard lines as he helped his sister-in-law into the wagon. No words of farewell were exchanged as the wagon pulled away, only a tense nod between the brothers. That evening, the house seemed eerily quiet after 2 weeks of constant tension. Francesca was putting away dishes in the kitchen when Garrett appeared in the doorway. Walk with me, he asked. It wasn't an order, but a genuine question. Francesca glanced at Mrs. O'Malley, who nodded her permission, though her expression was curious. Together, Francesca and Garrett stepped out onto the porch and then down to the path that led through the garden Catherine had planted years ago, now maintained by the ranch hands in her memory. They walked in silence for a while, the setting sun casting long shadows across the lawn. Finally, Garrett spoke. My brother won't be returning, he said simply. I've made it clear that while I'm willing to help him with reasonable expenses, I won't sell the ranch or any part of it. I'm glad, Francesca replied honestly. Vivian said something to you before they left, Garrett observed. She looked smug. Francesca hesitated, not wanting to repeat the cruel words. It wasn't important. It upset you, he countered. I could see it in your face. After a moment's consideration, Francesca decided on honesty. She suggested that I was trying to improve my position by gaining your favor, and that even if I succeeded, you would never see me as anything but charity. Garrett stopped walking, his expression darkening. That sounds like Vivian, always able to find the cruelest thing to say. It doesn't matter, Francesca said, though the words had haunted her all afternoon. It matters to me, Garrett said firmly. He turned to face her fully, the setting sun illuminating half his face in golden light. Francesca, when I put my hat on your head that day in town, do you know what I said? You said it looked better on me, she recalled. No, after that, to the men with me. When she shook her head, he continued. I said, she's my treasure. They laughed, thinking I was joking about the hat, but I wasn't talking about the hat. Francesca's heart seemed to stop, then restart at double speed. You hardly knew me. I knew enough, he said simply. I recognized something in you, a strength, a dignity, despite your circumstances. It reminded me of myself when I first came west with nothing but determination and dreams. He took a step closer, close enough that she could see the varying shades of blue in his eyes. These past months, watching you work, seeing your kindness and your quiet resolve, I've come to care for you, Francesca, more than I should, perhaps, given our respective positions. Mrs. O'Malley would have a fit, Francesca said, her voice barely above a whisper. That drew a smile from him. Mrs. O'Malley has already given me a piece of her mind on the subject. She thinks I'm being improper. Aren't you? The question slipped out before Francesca could stop it. Absolutely, Garrett admitted. By the standards of society, my interest in you is entirely inappropriate. You work for me. You're younger than I am. You have no family connections, no dowry, nothing that would make you a suitable match in the eyes of people like my brother and his wife. Each point struck Francesca like a small blow, confirming her worst fears. But then Garrett continued. And none of that matters to me, he said softly. I've lived by society's rules. I married a woman my parents approved of, though I grew to love her deeply, and I've managed my affairs as a respectable gentleman should. But Catherine's death taught me that life is too short and too precious to waste on other people's expectations. He reached out, hesitated, then gently took her hand in his. I'm not asking for anything from you, Francesca. I just wanted you to know that Vivian was wrong. I don't see you as charity or as someone beneath me. I see you as a woman of extraordinary worth. Tears pricked at Francesca's eyes. No one had ever spoken to her like this, had ever seen in her what Garrett claimed to see. I don't know what to say, she admitted. You don't need to say anything, he assured her. This isn't a proposal or a proposition. It's simply the truth, offered without expectation. But Francesca found she did have something to say. I care for you too, she confessed, her voice steady despite the trembling of her heart. From the moment you placed your hat on my head, you've treated me with a kindness and respect I had forgotten existed in the world. How could I not come to care for you in return? The smile that spread across Garrett's face was like the sunrise, transforming his features with joy. Then perhaps, he said, we should see where these feelings lead us. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The gesture, so simple yet so intimate, sent a cascade of warmth through Francesca's body. May I court you properly, Francesca Turner? Garrett asked, his voice husky. I would like that very much, she replied, her own voice breathless with emotion. As they walked back to the house, hand in hand in the gathering twilight, Francesca felt as if she had stepped into a dream, one she had never dared to dream for herself. Mrs. O'Malley's reaction to the changed relationship between her employer and the young maid was predictably complicated. Initially scandalized, she gradually came to accept the situation with reluctant approval, particularly after Francesca was installed in one of the guest rooms upstairs and relieved of the most menial household duties. At least he's being proper about it, she muttered to Francesca one morning as they prepared breakfast together. Courting you like a gentleman should, not taking advantages. The courtship proceeded at a measured pace. Garrett took Francesca on rides around the ranch, teaching her to handle a gentle mare he selected especially for her. They shared meals on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains. In the evenings they sat in the parlor while Garrett read aloud from books Francesca had never had the opportunity to experience, Dickens, Austen, even Shakespeare, whose language initially confused her, but soon captivated her imagination. As the weeks passed and winter settled over the ranch, their relationship deepened. Francesca found in Garrett not just a protector, but a partner, someone who valued her opinions and encouraged her to express them. He, in turn, discovered in her a quiet wisdom and resilience that complemented his own strength. The first time he kissed her was on Christmas Eve. The house had been decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, and a massive tree stood in the corner of the parlor, adorned with candles and ornaments that Catherine had collected over the years. Mrs. O'Malley had tactfully retired early, leaving them alone by the fire. I have something for you, Garrett said, producing a small package wrapped in silver paper. You've already given me so much, Francesca protested. Her own gift to him, a handkerchief she had embroidered with his initials, seemed painfully inadequate in comparison. "This is different," he insisted, placing the package in her hands. "Open it." Inside was a delicate silver chain with a pendant that matched her mother's locket in design, though this one was set with a small but perfect diamond. "It's beautiful," she breathed, lifting it from the box. "I had it made in Denver," Garrett explained, "to complement your mother's locket. I thought you might wear them together." As he fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers brushing against her skin, Francesca felt a surge of emotion so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. She turned to face him, words of gratitude on her lips, but before she could speak, he leaned forward and kissed her. The kiss was gentle at first, a tentative question. When she responded, sliding her arms around his neck, it deepened into something more profound, a promise, a declaration. When they finally parted, both breathing quickly, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Francesca," he said simply. "I think I have since the moment I saw you." "I love you too," she replied, the words feeling both momentous and completely natural. With that exchange, something settled between them, a certainty about their future together, though neither spoke of specific plans that night. As winter gave way to spring, rumors spread through the territory about the relationship between Garrett Sullivan, the wealthy rancher, and the young woman he had rescued from poverty. Some of the gossip was unkind, suggesting Francesca had ensnared him with feminine wiles, or that Garrett was merely amusing himself with a pretty face. But those who knew them saw the genuine affection and respect that flowed between them, and gradually acceptance replaced speculation. In April, as the first wildflowers bloomed across the ranch, Garrett took Francesca on a ride to a secluded spot overlooking the valley. They dismounted and spread a blanket on the grass, enjoying a picnic lunch in the warm spring sunshine. "I first came to this spot 20 years ago," Garrett told her as they sat side by side, looking out over the land he had built into a thriving ranch. "I was 22, just arrived from Boston with nothing but dreams and determination. I stood here and promised myself I would make something of this valley." "You certainly kept that promise," Francesca observed, gazing at the sprawling ranch below. The cattle grazing peacefully, the buildings sturdy and well-maintained. "I did," he agreed. "But dreams change as we grow. When I was young, success meant proving myself, building something substantial with my own hands. Then, with Catherine, it became about creating a legacy, a home for the family we planned to have." He turned to look at Francesca, his expression earnest. "Now, with you, I've discovered that success means nothing without someone to share it with, someone who understands its true value." From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. "Francesca Turner, when I placed my hat on your head that day in town, I saw something precious, a treasure others had failed to recognize. Every day since has only confirmed what I knew instinctively then, that you are the most valuable thing in my life." He opened the box to reveal a ring, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, set in silver. "Will you marry me? Not because I can give you security or comfort, though I promise you both, but because together we can build a life that matters?" Tears blurred Francesca's vision as she looked from the ring to Garrett's face, alight with love and hope. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion welling within her. "Yes, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Garrett's smile was radiant. "They called you worthless," he said softly, "but I always knew you were my treasure." The wedding took place in June, with the ranch decked in wildflowers and the mountains providing a majestic backdrop. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, attended by the ranch hands, Mrs. O'Malley, who wept despite her earlier reservations, and a few friends from neighboring properties. Garrett's brother declined the invitation, a fact that caused a momentary shadow but couldn't dim the joy of the day. As Francesca walked toward Garrett, wearing a gown of ivory silk he had ordered from Denver, she felt as if her life had come full circle from the desperate girl stumbling into Redemption Creek to a woman valued, respected, and deeply loved. The minister spoke of partnership and devotion, of building a life together founded on mutual respect. When it came time for the vows, Garrett took Francesca's hands in his voice clear and strong, as he promised to love and cherish her for all his days. When Francesca spoke her own vows, she added words that weren't in the traditional ceremony. "I promise to be a true partner to you, to value what you've built and help it grow, to fill our home with love and laughter, and to remind you every day that the greatest treasures are those we find in each other." As they exchanged rings and were pronounced husband and wife, Garrett kissed her with a tenderness that spoke of both passion and profound respect. And when they turned to face their friends and neighbors as Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, the cheers that erupted were genuine and heartfelt. The celebration lasted well into the night, with music and dancing in the barn, decorated for the occasion with lanterns and more wildflowers. As darkness fell, Garrett led Francesca away from the festivities to a quiet spot on the porch of their home. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, leaning into his embrace. From his pocket, Garrett produced his hat, the same one he had placed on her head that fateful day in Redemption Creek. With a smile, he set it gently on her head, just as he had done then. "My treasure," he said softly, before kissing her under the vast canopy of stars. The years that followed brought both joy and challenges. The ranch prospered under their joint stewardship, with Francesca proving to have a keen mind for business that complemented Garrett's practical knowledge of cattle and land management. Together, they expanded operations, building Silver Creek Ranch into one of the most successful enterprises in the territory. A year after their wedding, Francesca gave birth to a daughter they named Catherine, after Garrett's first wife, a decision Francesca had suggested, knowing that honoring the past didn't diminish their present happiness. 2 years later, a son joined their family, followed by twin girls 3 years after that. Through it all, the sleepless nights with infants, the challenges of raising children in the sometimes harsh frontier environment, the occasional droughts or harsh winters that threatened the ranch's prosperity, their partnership remained strong. They faced each obstacle together, drawing strength from their love and mutual respect. As their children grew, they learned the story of how their parents met, how a discarded hat and an act of kindness had changed 2 lives forever. It became a family legend, a reminder that true worth isn't measured by possessions or status, but by character and heart. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Garrett surprised Francesca with a trip to Boston, her first journey to the East Coast. They visited his childhood home, now occupied by his nephew, George having passed away years earlier, and were received warmly by society that had initially been skeptical of Garrett's frontier bride. As they strolled through Boston Common on a crisp autumn day, Francesca reflected on the journey that had brought her from desperate poverty to this moment of contentment. "Penny for your thoughts," Garrett said, his hair now streaked with silver, but his blue eyes as bright as ever. "I was just thinking about fate," she replied, squeezing his hand. "How differently my life might have turned out if that snake hadn't spooked your horse that day." Garrett smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. "I don't believe it was the snake. I think we were always meant to find each other. Even across a crowded street in a dusty mining town? Even then." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Do you remember what Mrs. Holloway called you that day?" "Worthless," Francesca said, the word having lost its sting long ago. "And do you remember what I said when I put my hat on your head?" "She's my treasure," Francesca quoted, smiling at the memory. "I meant it then, and I mean it even more now." Garrett cupped her face in his hands. 20 years together, 4 beautiful children, a thriving ranch, and every day I discover new reasons to treasure you. As they kissed, surrounded by the golden leaves of autumn in a city far from their home, Francesca knew with absolute certainty that true worth wasn't defined by others' judgments, but by love freely given and returned in equal measure. They returned to Silver Creek Ranch in time for the first snow, greeted enthusiastically by their children and grandchildren who had gathered to welcome them home. As Garrett helped Francesca down from the wagon, he placed his hat, newer now, but similar to the original, on her head with the same gentle gesture he had used all those years ago. "Welcome home, Mrs. Sullivan," he said, his voice warm with love. "It's good to be home, Mr. Sullivan," she replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. And as they walked arm in arm toward the house they had built together, not just the physical structure, but the home they had created through love, respect, and partnership. Francesca reflected that sometimes the greatest treasures are found in the most unexpected places. A dusty street in a mining town, a battered hat placed on a weary head, and the heart of a man who could see beyond circumstances to the true worth within. That night, as they lay in their bed listening to the winter wind outside their window, Garrett pulled Francesca close. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Tying your life to mine, staying in this wild country when you could have had an easier life?" Francesca turned to face him, tracing the familiar lines of his face with gentle fingers. "Not for a single moment," she assured him. "This is where I belong, where we belong. Together." As they drifted toward sleep in each other's arms, Francesca thought again of that moment when a dusty, desperate girl had picked up a fallen hat and a kind-hearted rancher had seen value where others saw only worthlessness. From that simple act of recognition had grown a love that had weathered every storm, a partnership that had built a legacy, and a happiness that continued to deepen with each passing year. "My treasure," Garrett murmured, already half asleep. "Always," Francesca whispered back, knowing that the greatest wealth in life wasn't measured in gold or cattle or land, but in the blessing of being truly seen and valued for exactly who you are.